All right, here we are again. Now, letter 15, The Devil, of Valentin Tomberg's Meditations on the Tarot. Now, you may have noticed there are no epigraphs. And Tomberg tells us why he doesn't. I mean, he doesn't say this is why there's no epigraphs, but this is why this letter is different from all the others. Because, as he says on page 402, of the intrinsic difference between meditation on the other arcana and meditation on the arcanum, the devil, is as follows. As it is a matter in the tarot of a series of spiritual or hermetic exercises, and as, on the other hand, every spiritual exercise tends to lead to the identification of the meditant with the subject of meditation, that is, to an act of intuition, the 15th arcanum of the tarot, insofar as it is a spiritual exercise, cannot and must not lead to an experience of identification of the meditant with the subject of meditation. One should not arrive at an intuition of evil, since intuition is identification, and identification is communion. Right? And so this is potentially dangerous, is what he's saying. So this is why he even says in his own words on, I believe, page 403, that he's undertaking a phenomenological investigation of this arcanum and of this principle, right? Of what is the devil, what is the demon. And he talks about the preoccupation of occultists with the demonic, with evil, question of evil. And I mean, you've probably seen this yourself, and lots of people. I mean, when people think of the occult, that's what they think of right away. Now, that's a stereotype, of course, but it's not without foundation. Nevertheless, when Tomberg gets into his conversation here about occultists who are preoccupied with evil, who he's got in mind are the anthroposophists. And here's what he says here on page 402. Another example of an excessive accentuation of the knowledge of evil, and therefore of an occupation of consciousness with evil, is the preoccupation with the problem of the twofold, or even threefold, evil amongst German anthroposophists, Lucifer and Ahriman, and even Azura, the two principles of evil, subjective and objective, the seducing principle and the hypnotizing principle, have so taken possession of the consciousness of anthroposophists that there is hardly a single thing which would not fall under the category of being Ahrimanic or Luciferic. Science is Ahrimanic insofar it is objective. Christian mysticism is Luciferic insofar it is subjective. The East is under the domination of Lucifer because it denies matter. The West is under the domination of Ahriman because it has created material civilization and tends to materialism. All machines, including the apparatus of radio and television, incorporate Ahrimanic demons. Laboratories are the fortresses of Ahriman. Theaters and churches, some believe, are the fortresses of Lucifer, and so on. Anthroposophists are led to classify thousands of facts from the point of view of the category of evil, which is revealed through them, which suffices to occupy them for the whole day. And to so occupy oneself amounts to contact with evil, and a corresponding reduction of living and inspiring contact with good. The result, this one hurts. The result is a lame wisdom without wings, deprived of creative elan, which only repeats and comments to satiety, what the master Dr. Rudolf Steiner said. And yet Rudolf Steiner has certainly said things of a nature to awaken the greatest creative elan. And he further goes on and skip a little bit. It is the preoccupation with evil that has clipped the wings of the anthroposophical movement, which has rendered it such as it is since the death of its founder, a movement for cultural reform, deprived of living esotericism, that is, without mysticism, without gnosis, and without magic, which having been replaced by lectures, study, and intellectual work aiming at establishing a concordance between the writings and stenographed lectures of the master. That hurts, I'm sure. But, I spent 16 years as a Waldorf teacher, a little bit more as a Waldorf master teacher. I'm a biodynamic farmer, so I have, it's no secret I have tremendous admiration for Rudolf Steiner's initiatives. But I can't say that Tomberg is wrong in his characterization of anthroposophist. Now, this does not mean every anthroposophist does this, but it certainly is a characteristic of the anthroposophical movement as a whole. And I think as we get into this conversation on this 15th Arcanum, it's the egregore of the anthroposophical movement certainly participates in this kind of mania, obsession, preoccupation, as Tomberg calls it, with Lucifer and Ahriman. And then and to complicate that even further, after Tomberg's work became known and started to circulate, ever so slightly in Catholic circles, but certainly in esoteric circles, and inclining people toward Catholicism, or at least toward traditional Christianity, some anthroposophists got a little freaked out. One in particular, you may have heard of him, Sergei O. Prokofiev, who was the nephew of the great Russian composer. He wrote 2 whole books on Tomberg. And the first, I own the first one. Here it is. The Case of Valentin Tomberg. It looks like a CSI, it's like, what's that show they used to have? True Crimes, something like, or whatever. It looks like one of those things. Open the case. Interesting, though, the case, the title in German is Der Fall of Valentin Tomberg, and fall in German means both case and fall. Get it? The fall of Valentin Tomberg. So apparently it's not a favorable account of Tomberg's work. And in fact, I love the subtitle. You see it? Anthroposophy or Jesuitism. It's funny, when the book came out, and what year was this? Came out? 1997, so it's been a while. Came out in 95 in German, but came out in 97 in English. And there was a magazine, which was kind of interesting magazine, Gnosis Magazine, which was I think it was subtitled A Journal of the Western Mystery Traditions. So they had stuff on Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, esoteric Christianity, even witchcraft, or Wicca kind of stuff. It was an interesting magazine, and it was intelligently written for the time. I mean, not everything was great, but it was very interesting, I thought. And they did a review of Prokofiev's The Case of Valentin Tomberg, and the title was, "Uh-oh, those darn Jesuits are at it again," which I think is pretty funny. It is true that anthroposophists tend to get freaked out about Jesuits. I'm sure they're just thrilled that there's a Jesuit pope in the chair of Peter right now, and they suspect evil doings. Aha! I'm not one of them. And then after this, as if this weren't enough, Prokofiev came out with another book. It's called Valentin Tomberg, or Anthroposophy, a problematic relationship. And that one, like this one, is a poisonous little number. It was really hurtful to read. It hurts me. I feel kind of sick when I pick it up. It's like touching something. It's not nice. Like, I would say touching a snake, but I like snakes. So the egregore of anthroposophy apparently gets freaked out about the Catholic Church, which they're not the only ones, of course. But to return to our card, the 15th Arcanum, the Devil. So this is an interesting letter in that way, and it's shorter too, if you noticed. After these chapters, or the letters after the first 4 or 5 start to get considerably longer, And this one shortens up 27 pages. I mean, it's one of the shorter chapters. Now, so what do we do? I mean, how do we talk about or think about the evil one, or the evil ones in this case? And he doesn't, like we said, he doesn't provide us with an epigraph. Though on page 404, his selection from Ezekiel, could very well serve as an epigraph, but he doesn't want us to meditate on the devil. But he does want to talk about the generation of demons. So what is this business? This generation of demons. And he points out on page 403 that with the angelic hierarchies, you can understand them as categorized, as hierarchical, as arranged, as ordered. But he points out that the demonic realm and the fallen angels, they're not so categorized, and they're characterized by chaos. The world of evil is a chaotic world, at least such as it presents itself to the observer. So there's probably some rhyme or reason to it, but from our vantage point, it's chaotic. It's not ordered. It's disordered. Right? And as he says, it will therefore be a matter of an effort to comprehend this arcanum at a distance, which he emphasizes, by means of the phenomenological method. And he does this phenomenology straight up with the card. He sees the figure, the devil, and the two people chained to the devil, or chained to his pedestal. And he points out that this card doesn't depict the devil ensnaring people. Rather, it's the other way around. It's the people created this devil, or this egregore, and become chained to it. It's kind of an object lesson in ideology, or the dangers of ideology. And interesting, he even though he only talks about it for a paragraph or so, the example he gives from Alexandra David Neal and her, what's it called, Magic and Mystery in Tibet, of Tibetan monks creating and then learning how to destroy the demons that they created. Kind of a interesting phenomenon. Dangerous too. I mean, we knew there was here near us in Ann Arbor, Tibetan Lama Gelek Rinpoche was living for maybe 20 or 30 years. And I remember hearing a story that one of his disciples had a dream that a demon was coming to pursue him. And I don't know if he said what he said. He said, something, he mentioned Gelek Rinpoche to the demon, and it destroyed the demon. And the Gelek Rinpoche told him, good thing you did that, or you might have died in that dream. Now, because the Tibetan Buddhists, I mean, they have this experience of creating and then destroying these demons. It doesn't mean even that demon that this person dreamt of was real. It's like a hierarchy of the left kind of demon. But as Tavrik points out, that these generated demons are very powerful. Even though they're not fallen angels, they are really powerful. And I think this is why, if you noticed, he really doesn't talk too much about possession in this letter. He mentions it in a way when he's talking about C.G. Jung and talking about psychopathological complexes, right, which look demonic. And here's a quote from Jung, right? Complexes do indeed behave like secondary or partial personalities possessing a mental life of their own. That sounds like a demon to me, which is Tavrik's point. But they're created. They're created by us, or by our society, or our institutions, or groups, and then they take on a life of their own. which is disturbing if you think about it. And he says on page 407, he says, engendered subjectively, they become forces independent of the subjective consciousness which engendered them, like Frankenstein, right? They are, in other words, magical creations, for magic is the objectification of that which takes its origin in subjective consciousness. Right? You know, they might be created, but they're real. That's his point. And in page 408, he says, well, how are they engendered? He talks, as with all generation, that of demons is the result of cooperation of the male principle and the female principle. That is, the will and the imagination, in the case of generation, through the psychic life of an individual. And then that's why he points out to the two individuals on the card. He says, it is they who are the parents of the demon and who have become enslaved by their own creation. And isn't this what sin does to us? We become slaves to our own sins. I mean, we created it. Whether it could be drug addiction, pornography, and addiction, particularly we become slaves to, but we make the choice to do it in the first place, right? And then we can't do anything about it. That's why I think these addictions rightfully are called diseases. I mean, Jung would call them too, right? A diseased mind. They are diseases. And then Tomberg proceeds from there, moves into, he's focusing on communism and Marxism, because he's had first experience of how just wonderful these ideologies are when they killed his parents and his brother and ravaged Europe, and he had to leave Russia. And he connects, interestingly, he quotes the first line of the Manifesto of the Communist Party. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. And Tomberg's like, bingo! That's right, it's a specter, it's an egregore. Right? And he says, meanwhile, we may add, the specter has grown in stature and power, engendered by the will of the masses, born from the despair following the Industrial Revolution in Europe, nourished by the resentment accumulated amongst the masses through the generations, armed with a dummy intellectuality which is Hegel's dialectic misconstrued. This specter has grown and continues to make the rounds in Europe and in other countries. And I think, look at so much, especially we talk about how polarized American culture is at this moment, and probably Europe too. You gotta think that these groups engender their own egregores and become slaves to them, which deadens thinking. They're no longer able to think independently. They're beholden to this thing, either that they surrender their will to, this egregore or of a group or an ideology, or they were the ones who invented it themselves, and nevertheless still become enslaved to it. So it's pretty phenomenal. And interesting, we talked about Jacques Derrida a little bit before, but one of his books is The Spectre of Marx. Spectres of Marx, that's what he calls it. Drawing on the same idea. Now he, like I said, he lets go on Marxism here, but you can stick in the ideology of choice. Just pick an ideology and really, seriously, do your own phenomenological reduction of it in the light of this card, of this Arcanum, the 15th, the Devil, right? And speaking of the power of the egregore, this is it. Communism doesn't have it's not something started by the fallen hierarchies. This is a self-generated demon. And he says on page 409, we people of the 20th century know that the great pests of our time are the egregores of ideological superstructures, which have cost humanity more life and suffering than the great epidemics of the Middle Ages. Right? And he talks then about how the four traditional rules of Hermeticism, stand in opposition to this kind of creation, especially the fourth: to dare, to will, to know, and to be silent. To be silent is above all the magical commandment of not engendering demons through our arbitrary will and imagination. It is the task of silencing arbitrary will and imagination. Right? Arbitrary will, it's an important term here. You have no control over it. I mean, really, if you think about controlling your thinking and not engendering egregores or demonic beings through faulty thinking, through thinking not clarified or not lifted up into the vertical dimension, not open to grace. That's right, in the realm of the serpent. Right? We've talked about this before. And he talks about the radicalism as a form of egregore. The intoxication is the word he uses. The intoxication to change everything. This fever of desire, page 410. To change everything utterly at a single stroke, which gave birth to the demon of class hatred, atheism, disdain for the past, and material interest being placed above all else, which is now making the rounds in the world. This demon is being heroically combated at present, in 1963, by the head of a large communist country, who is doing all that is humanly possible to replace it by a spirit of care for the people and for their well-being. I'm guessing he's thinking about Khrushchev, who, right after this, got bumped out of the picture. He might not be. I mean, my only guess would be 63. It's the Cold War. Kennedy was still alive. This would probably Kennedy was still alive, so I imagine this is going to be early in 63. Then he continues. Right. Gives lots of examples of demonic visions, I guess we could say, or locutions, or spiritual experiences of the demonic. And he uses the example of Saint Anthony the Great and Teresa of Avila, I think John of the Cross. And when he's doing it, and I think this is important, they all are in agreement that when the demonic approaches, when one's in prayer or meditation, it's very different than the feeling when God approaches, when Christ approaches, or when the angels or saints. When the demonic approaches, there's a feeling of chaos and distress and depression and sadness and anxiety and confusion, right? And as Talmud points out, this goes through all of history. So pay attention to that. It must be a law, right? And he continues, and he says, this is what he says: spiritual exercise, our authentic spiritual experience remains the same across the ages, just as geometrical reasoning remained the same across the ages until Lobachevsky, right? And it is this immutable reality of spiritual experience which is the foundation and essence of Hermeticism, that is, of knowledge founded on first-hand experience of spiritual reality across the ages. And that's, kind of what he's doing here. He's doing phenomenology. He's looking at the knowledge of first-hand experience of spiritual reality across the ages, right? And this is why, and he points out, this is why he turns to St. Teresa, St. Anthony, John of the Cross, because they are masters of these spiritual experiences. Much more masters than most people from an esoteric or occult background. He talks about Maître Philippe de Leon, and if you know about him, he was a pretty remarkable healer from an early age, from I think the age of 13, and he could heal people, and he attributed it to the intervention of Christ. And he was even given a medical degree without having gone to school. He went to Russia because he kind of got chased out of France, and when he went to Russia, they conferred a degree upon him to let him practice medicine, because what he did was so amazing. And one of the things that happened, though, is apparently his daughter was 24, 25 years old or so, and she was sick, and he was not allowed to heal her, which he described as a tremendous cross, that he couldn't heal his own daughter. Right? Which reminds me of the story of Bernadette of Lourdes, right? Saint Bernadette, who died of bone cancer. Even though she discovered the stream where the Virgin appeared to her, and which conferred healing upon thousands of people, she said, "The stream's not for me." Kind of an interesting aspect of this kind of work. Who's it for? And you would want to be it. There's a part of us that would want it to be for us, but for some reason it's not when people are involved at this level of spiritual development. So I'm not there, but it is interesting how those things do happen, and there is a kind of consonance over time and through different personages with that kind of quality and aspect. So here I have a question for you. On page 418, Tomberg says, "It is not legitimate initiation which constitutes the chain, or rather the flow, of the tradition, but rather the niveau and authenticity of spiritual experience and the depth of thought that it comprises. Therefore, it is initiation per se which constitutes the Hermetic tradition across the ages, and not the transmission of initiation by way of rituals and formulae. If the tradition depended only on the latter, it would already long ago have been either extinguished or certainly lost in the jungle of quarrels over rights and legitimacy. Now it is he who knows from first-hand experience who represents the tradition, and it is his authentic knowledge which is his legitimacy." Right? What does that mean? Well, he's like Philippe of Lyon. He's dismissing orders of initiation that say that, the Golden Dawn, for instance, or Freemasonry. Even though Freemasonry, I think they're more symbolic than, well, they probably all are, but Freemasonry, there's a degree system, and maybe they're all like that. Is that these things don't confer initiation. What confers initiation is experience. And so, for an example, I think you can tell through reading this book that Valentin Tomberg had an impressive range of spiritual experiences. Likewise, you could say the same for Rudolf Steiner. We've talked about quite a bit. And you can also tell by the things that they institute. Does it bring good into the world? And I think this is a great example with Steiner, with his contributions to education, agriculture, medicine, the care for the handicapped. It's hard to attribute that to a non-initiated person, for a person who didn't study most of those areas as a professional, still to bring renovation to them. That's how you can tell. By their fruits you will know them. And so yeah, so and so he continues when he's talking about initiation in this way. So what is initiation that he's talking about? And he gives a definition: to see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending. Wherever that happens, there's Philippo Dion. Right? That's initiation. Rudolf Steiner's initiation. I'm sure there are, many other individuals we could point to. Probably a lot of them we don't even know, or that are mostly unknown. And then he points out as a greatest example is Saint Francis of Assisi, the initiate of the first order, he calls him, in the tradition of Christian Hermeticism. And I think because he really, you can tell he has a great appreciation for Saint Francis. But I think what's important, and to me, what makes Saint Francis a Hermeticist is, we talked about it before, his love for God, his love for his fellow man, and his love for nature. I mean, that's it. In fact, today I was at Mass and they sang, I can't remember which one of St. Francis's canticles. They sang some setting of it. It was nice. But and also, and actually, another kind of famous Christian song, "Morning is Broken," which Cat Stevens made a hit back in the 70s. But actually, it was a poem or a hymn written by the Catholic. She was Anglican, converted to Catholicism. She was a poet, Eleanor Fargen, if you know her. She's kind of more known for writing children's verse and children's stories, but her poetry for adults is gorgeous. If you can find a copy, it's really hard to find. If you can find a copy of her poetry, get it. And she wrote that beautiful, beautiful hymn, "Morning is Broken," which is so inherently theological, so inherently hermetic, because the love of God, man, and nature, it's all right there. And St. Francis as well. And from here, Tomberg, working phenomenologically, raises another question. Well, so we've established that creating an egregore is possible, which is evil. Is it possible to create a positive or a good egregore? A group soul, or what do they call it? A group mind. This is what it's called by Freud and others in psychology, right? The group mind. And we've all experienced the group mind. And as far as I'm concerned, the group mind is always an egregore. It's what got the Catholic Church in trouble with clericalism, the group mind, right? That's demonic. It's the group mind I mentioned before, but academic departments tend to develop a group mind, or schools develop a group mind. And in Waldorf schools, unfortunately, they call it the being of the school, but I'm not sure it's the being of the school. I don't think it's like the guardian angel. It often limits the institution or the group, and then it becomes kind of insular and suspicious of people from outside. You can tell that's an egregore move right there. Like for instance, he points to the example from Tobit of the demon who falls in love with Judith in Tobit, and I think the same thing happens with the egregores of institutional groups. Even though it might not be super evil, I mean, this is evil. Paranoia, keep others away. You're mine. So think about that. I think it's a valid point. But Tomberg, goes on. He says, let me get this straight, basically, is what he's saying. Good artificial demons do not exist. One cannot enter engender positive egregores, right? And here's why. Right? In order to engender a psychic or astral entity, it is necessary that the psychic and mental energy that you produced to this effect coagulates, that is, enfolds. Aha, the way of the serpent, right? A form is not produced by radiation. It is produced only by coagulation or enfoldment. Now, good only radiates. It does not at all enfold. It is always evil which does this. Boom! That's it right there, people. Although one can certainly engender demons, one cannot engender artificial angels. And even he goes on, if there are egregores of initiation orders in religious and other communities, they are always negative. Amen. Now he says the egregore of Catholicism, which manifests itself as fanaticism, cruelty, diplomatic wisdom, and excessive pretensions, which those are kinds of the sins of clericalism, not to mention others. But it's, every group, this is the danger. This is the danger. This is that we live in this world, and we have to acknowledge that we're in a way of the way of the serpent is part of how it is here. But that's why the opening to grace, the vertical opening to grace, is so emphasized in Tom Berg's work, because that's the antidote. That's the antidote, and that actually redeems the work of the serpent then, or the things that crawl along the horizontal. And in continuing with this, he talks. We talked a little bit about before, so I won't get into too much. But he talks about how different nations have their own guardian angels, or usually an archangel. A Franciscan order has its own guardian, which is Saint Francis. So, and then he moves from there to talking about holy places and relics. Remember I told you my story about the relic of Mary and the icon of Saint Frenarius in one of the earlier letters. But here he refutes something. Now, if you don't know what he's talking about, you might not know what he's refuting. He says on page 420, he said, holy places, miraculous relics, statues, and icons are not depots for the psychic and mental energy of pilgrims and other believers. Right? Now, what he's talking about, especially in Blavatsky and Theosophy, and particularly with Annie Besant and C.W. Leadbeater, they really push this, that relics aren't really magical as they are. They're magical because people have rendered devotion to them. And it could have even been, could have been this pen. Could have been this pen. It's the pen of Saint Joseph. Saint Joseph used this pen on when they signed into the inn, so people could venerate this pen. And over a couple of centuries, or over many centuries, the pen does become magnetized in a magical object because of the devotion people paid to it, even though by itself it was nothing. And he's saying that's not how it works. That's not how relics work. That's not how holy places work. He said, but rather the places or objects are what the places where heaven opens and the angels are able to ascend and descend. And that was definitely my experience with that relic of St. Mary that was at that Orthodox church all those years ago. And another relic story I have. Here's a good story. This was probably about 1998, and the relics of Saint Teresa of Lisieux were on tour. Her whole relic, the whole thing, was on tour through the United States. And near where we lived at the time was in Berkeley, Michigan, the Shrine of the Little Flower, which is a huge church dedicated to Saint Therese. And I really wanted to go see these relics, but they were arriving at the church at 5 in the morning or 4:30 in the morning. And I had to teach. I was a school teacher at the time, so I had to get up, I had to go to school, which, so I had to get up super early to go to the church, and I'm not really great at getting up early. At least I wasn't then. I'm a farmer now, so I'm much better at it. So I thought, there's no way I'm going to make it there, but I'll set my alarm. And so I slept, and I missed the alarm. But then I had a dream that Saint Therese came up to me and she said, "Réveille-toi, wake up." And I woke up and I saw it was 4:45, or pretty close to when she would be there. So I get dressed real quickly, jump into my car, drive down to the church, which is about only 2 miles from my house. And even I was still a half a mile away from the church, and every parking space was taken. I just thought, never get in here. Never going to happen. But I did. I turned the corner at the church. I parked right across the street from the church. And I ran in. And just as I got in, right in front of me came the relics of Saint Therese. And I was in tears, And it was a profoundly moving experience. I mean, it was truly a profound experience. Then, gosh, maybe 7 or 8 years later, my wife and my children and I went to Mass at this church, which we didn't go to very often, once in a while. We went to Mass there, and in the vestibule they had the history of the church, photographs. And there was a photograph of one of the relics of St. Therese came. I wasn't paying attention. One of my kids was looking and said, "Hey, look, it's Dad." So apparently she wanted me to be there, and I need to be there. And so actually one of my oldest daughters is named after her, is inadvertently named after her. Her name is May Teresa Martin, which we didn't realize at the time is the same as Marie Therese Martin. But there you go. So there's my story. And the thing is, her relics were not magnetized. In fact, they can tell by the way her relics. I mean, she spoke to me. She spoke to me through those relics. And I don't know why I needed to see it, but I needed to see it. So this is important about these. This is a place where heaven opens up and angels ascend and descend. And he says, the law of relics and so forth is that the more one takes from them, the more force they radiate. Radiation, that's the word, right? Whilst the law of things magnetized fluidically is that of an inverse ratio between the energy deposited and the energy consumed. And he goes on, talisman are depots of magical energy. They are under the law of quantity. In contrast, relics are windows open to heaven. They are under the law of quality. Pretty good, eh? Good stuff. And then, so it's interesting, this letter on the devil. There's a lot of stuff that's not about evil, but about the good, and really contrasting the magnetism is a form of egregore creation in a way. It's not really engendering demons, but it works along those same kind of principles, right? Through the human will, and through time, I guess we could say, energy and devoted to it. But then it gets into actually some real good practical advice. How to get rid of demons. Tried and true, right? Holy water. He said, consecrated water is not water which has become a depot for the beneficial force of consecration, but rather it has been rendered susceptible to the presence of heaven. And a few drops of it are very effective for chasing demons away. It's borne out by authentic witnesses across the centuries. And it is almost too many to count. That's why when a priest comes to bless somebody's house, it's with holy water. Now, in the Eastern churches, this is probably a really good thing to do. It's the custom to, following the Feast of Theophany, to bless your house once a year. So every year the house gets blessed, which is a good thing to do. It's more than a house cleaning, because over the course of a year, who knows what can be attracted, to a person's house. You know. Another way he says to dispel a demon is, he says a demon perceived, that is, on whom the light of consciousness is thrown, is already a demon rendered impotent. Right? Now, a demon rendered impotent is a deflated balloon, which is, if you noted in the exorcism rituals, for possession, one of the key points is to get the demon's name. Tell me your name. You ask the demon to say its name under compulsion of the cross and more holy water being sprinkled on it. And once you have the name, you have control over it. That's the whole idea. Kind of the reverse of Adam naming the animals. Right? But on the other hand, we could say, kind of a sacred magic version of this naming is when, and I tell this to parents and teachers, giving children the names of things in their environment, trees or plants, doesn't give them power over the things, but gives them a relationship to it. The difference between a pine tree and a spruce tree, or between a red pine and a white pine. That's sacred magic. That's entering into a relationship with the kingdom of nature. So, but I digress. Let's go back to getting rid of demons. And he points out, where did that one go? I don't want to skip getting rid of demons until I read you this one. It's on the next page. Okay, I got it. I'm good. We're good. And he says here, on the bottom of 422. Now, I mentioned one of these before. So, again, he asks, how does one protect oneself and rid oneself of demons? It follows from the foregoing that clarity of thought, didn't I already mention this? And rightness of moral attitude are both necessary, and also sufficient, in order to supply the light which renders demons impotent. Nevertheless, one needs rest, time during which one is left in peace by demons. That is, time during which they are absent. So how do you get rid of them as you're coming to clarity of thought? In order to assure this, one has to resort to sacred magic. Right? One of the things he tells us, if you sense a demon approaching, make the sign of the cross towards the north, south, east, and west, each time saying the first two verses of Psalm 68, which I told you before. Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered. Let those who hate him flee before him. As smoke is driven away, so drive them away. As wax melts before a fire, let the wicked perish before God. Works. Also, those actually are verses used in the rite of exorcism, in the exorcism of a demon, and also they're used. I may have mentioned this before in the Eastern Rite, Easter Matins, when they open the tomb, the doors of the tomb. It's really kind of powerful when the tomb of Christ is opened, and this is sung, it's chanted. It's pretty moving experience. And then here's another one he gives. And if one senses depression or any other sign of approach of a demon or demons, one spits 3 times to the left and crosses oneself. Now I did that once or twice, and it works. I can't remember what the circumstances were. It was a long time ago. But it did come in handy, so keep that in your back pocket. And he says, these 2 procedures have been tried across the centuries, and I repeat, are very effective. You have a testimonial from me as well. They are so, above all, with regard to artificial demons. But here we go. With respect to entities of the hierarchies of the left, it is not so simple to protect oneself against them. Right? And then he gets into the thing is with the hierarchy of the left, like Satan in the book of Job, or Asmodeus in Tobit, they're there to test us. Now, I don't think a lot of people, well, I don't want to even venture to guess how often this happens. I think most people's experience of demons, at least if we're taking what Todberg is saying here, truthfully, are egregores. And probably even with demonic possession. Because notice he doesn't really talk about demonic possession here. So if he's right, most of those are egregores and not fallen angels. It's worth thinking of. I don't know. I don't have enough experience of that to render a judgment. But it's interesting what he says, and I do know the things he just mentioned right there about spitting 3 times and crossing in Psalm 68. I know they work. But he says with the hierarchies of the left that they must be convinced during the course of real testing that they are wrong. Let me test Job. There is another means of making them go away. There's no other means of making them go away. I'm sorry. And then, and this I think is important and easy to look over. He talks about Mephistopheles, and this fallen angel or hierarchy of the left figure that he calls Mephistopheles, that he takes from Faust, of course. And there are also entities from the hierarchies of the left who accuse by making use of ridicule, farce, as a means of demonstrating their prosecuting thesis. Right? They just play to how stupid we are and just make us look dumb. In the Christopher Marlowe's Faust, for instance, one of the figures, I can't remember his name, he gets cuckolded. He appears in public and he's got antlers, like the figures in the card, and it's again a comic scene, but it's Mephistopheles making him look dumb out of his own because of his own pretensions. And I think this also happened, and he says this is primarily the tack that Mephistopheles takes with what he calls spiritual snobs. He likes to make him look ridiculous because they are ridiculous. And he calls it Mephistophelian accusation is an example of Mephistophelian accusation against those who do not seek the truth as such, but rather extraordinary circumstances of revelation, spiritual show-offs. I should say, though, here's a good story for you, another one. Speaking of Mephistopheles, at a performance of Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, Marlowe is still alive, so it's still in the late 16th century. What happened is, after the invocation scene where Faustus invokes Mephistopheles, calls down the devil, an extra performer showed up on stage, uninvited. And someone noticed, and then production stopped. And for the rest of the evening, both the performers and the audience spent the night in prayer. So be careful with those egregores, people. And be careful about calling down spirits, even in jest, or even as a performance, because they might show up. Now, after Tomberg's discussion of Mephistopheles, he talks a little bit about, and it's kind of a gentle way to end. He talks about, where the gods and figures of the classical period of other nations, are they demons? Are they egregores? What are they? And What about are the gods of other people, are they all demons? Which is, kind of a standard line of explanation for a lot of people. Easier that way too, right? And he said it would be an error and a grave injustice to consider the four paganisms as the same thing. And that is like to see a priest of Moloch sacrificing human beings as a representative of the same cause as Plato. Right? And he calls these four paganisms the paganism of the philosophers and the initiates into the mysteries, symbolic and mythological paganism, natural paganism, and demoniacal paganism. Right? They're not all the same. And I would say, just as in Christianity, you have different levels of superstition and egregore creation. I should say, though, connected to this idea, so here's a story that I think everybody should read. If you're interested in esoteric studies at all, a book you must read is Apuleius' The Golden Ass. Now, if you haven't read it, I'll give you a brief précis of it. What happens is the lead character, Lucius, in the beginning of the story, starts fooling around with magic. He's kind of intrigued, He wants to see if he can turn. He meets a witch, and gets to be friends with the witch's assistant or maid, and he wants to see if he can use some of the potions. And when he does, he turns himself into an ass, and he spends most of the rest of the book as an ass, going through one trial after another. And these trials actually correspond to different stages in the mysteries of Isis, I think, or maybe the Eleusinian mysteries. But it's definitely a mystery religion drama that, if you don't know anything about the mystery religions, it's still a great story. But if you can read through, between the lines, you see, these were different stages in the initiation. But what happens at the end, though, is he's just at the point of despair. He's going to kill himself. He's sick of being an ass. He can't change, and he's determined to kill himself. But then he falls asleep on the sea, has a vision of Isis. Sophia, and the vision is so beautifully described, and her speech to him is so delightful. I had it. In fact, a friend of mine translated it, and I put it in the second volume of Jesus the Imagination. It's so beautiful. And so you can't read that story and that vision of Isis without thinking of Mary Sophia. It just shouts about this kind of higher initiation, this higher intuition of let's say the pre-Christian world. Even though when Apuleius wrote this, it was during the beginning of the Christian era, but Christians were kind of almost unknown to them. But you can see the same, some of the same qualities in Neoplatonism that Apuleius is drawing on, and also the mystery religions, which have clear echoes or clear resonances with Christianity. I mean, it's unavoidable, really. So this is how Tomberg ends his discussion. And as he said, I'll leave you with the quote he gives us from Origen on page 428. There is nothing amazing about it if the same God has implanted in the souls of all men the truths which he taught through the prophets and the Savior. If it's good, it comes from God. I'll see you next time.